Welcome, everybody, to Let's Talk Comics with Lily. That's me, Lily Seep Slate, specifically. Today's topic is sound effects and balloons. I grouped these together, sound effects and balloons, because I thought they paired well with the kinds of materials I brought into our class today. But first and foremost, we're going to begin with sound effects, because I feel like that's where my brain goes first. So I just want to do the bare bones. What are sound effects generally? And this is going to be for more print mediums. They're mimetic words. This means words that mimic sounds that are outside of the narrative, sounds in our real life, IRL. If you go outside and touch grass, it might make a little crunchy sound. That's mimetic, right? So if you see a crunch when someone touches grass in a comic and you think to yourself, ew, that's gross, I would never touch grass. But that's still a mimetic sound if in a world in which you went outside, you touched grass. I'm not speaking from personal experience. We're not projecting. That's just an example. So they can be internal or external, okay? So Thoth, you have some good examples here. Smash, boom, and ow are all, smash and boom are external, right? Ow is also like an external noise you might make. So more of an internal sound effect might be something like ba-bump, ba-bump, right? So this sound effect of the heart beating, or like the sound of your nerves tingling, like tingle, tingle. Like you're not actually hearing in the narrative world that sound, but it is kind of conveying something emotionally, internally. And of course, sound effects sometimes happen. Balloons, sometimes these balloons like smash and boom are very spiky. Sometimes they're very big. Like I said a little bit earlier, when we're thinking about sound effects, I want us to think of two things. Number one, what's making the sound? And number two, how is the sound represented? Okay, so the first example I'm going to bring up for us is Trigun, and the edition that I looked at didn't have any of the sound effects actually translated. So we're not really concerned right now about getting accurate translations for sound effects, so much as we're trying to focus more on where are the sound effects coming from and how is that sound being visually represented. Because that's something very interesting about sound effects, is that way in which not only the sound they're making can be mimetic, but even the appearance they take is mimicking the sound that they're trying to portray. Okay. So here we have an example. I have Trigun by Yasuhiro Nightao. Is that his actual last name? That's a cool last name, even if he took it. Okay, anyway, so I have a few examples that I wanted to show us, ones that I personally enjoy. So I don't know how to read any of these. I don't know Japanese, but I wanted to point out the difference between the sound effects we get here and the sound effects we get here. Right, we have this depiction of that huge grenade, grenade? Yes, potentially fired out of a grenade launcher, whisking past Vash's face, and it has an accompanying sound effect that is very thin, right, is almost also kind of whisking past him. It's loud from, as I'm getting for the second one. Exactly, it's loud. There are a bunch of different looking sound effects as well. So like we can think that the destruction caused by that grenade is very enormous. It's breaking a lot of things, and all of these things have these different sound effects that are ringing out. Let's look at some more examples. I wanted to include this one as a kind of, this is one of the panels that comes right after that first page, where they're also just hearing all of these sound effects surround them and play out around them. I think it's super fun that we have these kinds of more handwritten sound effects playing out down here, these smaller, almost unheard sound effects. And then we have, of course, the big ones that are layered on top. Third one definitely shows they're being surrounded by noise. Yeah, there's a sense of being surrounded. And that's actually being represented by the way in which the sound effects are all around their body and also like going above them. So there's a sense in which like this is a problem that is out of their reach. Almost kind of represents this unsolvable problem for where they are right now. I really, this is probably my favorite my favorite 2 pages and in the entirety of Trigun Volume 1. And the reason these are my favorite pages is because it makes it so clear that Trigun and Nightao are so cognizant of sound effect. Ooh, haunting is a fabulous word for it. I feel like Vash the Stampede in and of himself is a very haunting figure. The clicking of guns being loaded. Ooh. Okay, so we can kind of see all of these aimed weaponry as well. Again, I have no idea what this sound effect is. It could be guns being loaded. Here's what I like to think it is. I like to think that it's representative of the doors opening. And if it's representative of the doors opening, do we notice that like it's also being cut off right here? The way in which the doors are parting, revealing not only all of the men, but revealing the sound effect itself is super fun to me. Showing us that Trigun is aware of not only how it's visually representing its story, but even though comics are a silent medium, how are we audibly representing our narrative? This kind of reveal of this very haunting, very dangerous situation is accompanied by that reveal of the sound effect alongside it. It's super fun. All right, let's look at another one. I wanted to look at Girl from the Other Side because I think it does something very interesting. Okay? Specifically that, like we talked about, sound effects can be within balloons, right? Here's an example. Tap, tap, tap. Right? Luckily, all of these are translated for us. Right? We have the sound of someone walking, and we even get kind of this progressive miniaturization of them as we move upwards. As we move downwards, we have a feeling of it getting louder because it's getting bigger. Getting closer. It's depicting that kind of movement, not only in the tap tap, depicting to us movement, but we also like these are kind of like little footprints. I don't know who has 2 toes, but I'm imagining. But it's almost like you're like seeing the actual physical footsteps because of the way that those balloons are pictured for us, right? Here are a few other examples of noises that we get, or another example of a noise we get with a little tail, cree, the sound of the door opening. So almost as though the natural world, even though it is absent of people, there's still this way in which it's not silent. But then of course we immediately get these more silent panels. And so when we look at sound effects and we're looking at, how are they being portrayed? What's making the sound? How is that playing back into narrative? I also want to make sure we think about the question of what about silence? How is silence represented? Like I said, comics are a necessarily silent medium. We are taking the sound effects presented to us and using our own common experience to fill what that sound is. Okay? So then what do we do about silence? What other ways does manga portray a lack of sound? Okay? How does that emphasize certain things about its narrative? You said the light seems loud here? Yeah. Especially for Teacher, the character that's moving through these spaces. Shiva in and of herself is always portrayed in white, right? She is a very kind of loud existence in Teacher's life, to the point where his whole life is surrounding her, right? And so we see him next to this light multiple times, away from these like darker corners of the room. I like that. All of this to say that comics are a dance between the unseen and the seen. What is there and what isn't? Whenever we read a comic, we're necessarily looking, most of the time, at these sequences of panels that are back to back, that are asking us to fill in the gaps. What happened between these two? What happened between these two? We have to necessarily fill in movement, fill in concepts, ideas. We are experiencing when we read a comic something that no one else really is experiencing. They can come close, but the way that you experience your reading of a comic is going to be distinct from the person next to you reading it. And so that's why I want us to think about not only what are we seeing when we think about sound effects, how are they being represented, where are they coming from, but what about when sound effects are non-existent? Okay. What about when sound effects are absent when they should be there? How is that playing back into narrative? How is that playing back into our conception of the story and its characters? Let's talk briefly about balloons. This should be very familiar to people, all right? Balloons contain dialogue, present narrative, and can be dynamic. I did a little Sonic-esque balloon at the bottom to show that these things can, be very bombastic, right? Sometimes they also contain helium. This is true. Now, balloons will have usually round shapes, square shapes. They can also have these kinds of more jagged shapes. And they can also be in front of things. A lot of the times they are in front of things, right? So, what do we call it when a balloon is blocking something important? I take this from Gothic in Comics and Graphic Novels by Julia Round, where she calls this being ghosted. When an image is ghosted by a balloon, when it's being hidden from us. And she looks at this with regards to more Gothic presentations of hauntings, right? But I think it's, again, playing into this larger conversation about what are we being shown and what are we not being shown, okay? What are we seeing and what are we not seeing? I wanted to talk about Demon Slayer. I've actually talked about Demon Slayer before on this channel when we looked at, when I did like a whole presentation about Demon Slayer and how it's about family. So a lot of things I'm going to say now are a little bit repeated from that, but still fall in line with the conversation we're having today. So first and foremost, I wanted to focus on the balloons that we see at the beginning of Demon Slayer here. There's a lot of them. These are some of the opening pages from chapter 1. There's lots of people in the panels, and there's lots of balloons, okay? So we have this kind of, this heavy population of both people and balloons. Near the end of chapter 1, lots of exposition, right? Lots of character building, lots of setting things up, okay? Exposition, character introduction. It's all set up, right? And this is what the end of the chapter looks like. These are the last 2 pages on the left side here. We've already kind of come to a premise, right? We have our premise already. His family is, spoiler for the beginning of Demon Slayer, literally episode 1, chapter 1. His family dies, okay? They are killed by a demon. What do you go figure, right? And the only people left in the panel and the only words left in the panels are silence and let's go. We see a clear juxtaposition between the beginning and the end. What was Tanjiro's life filled with before? What is it filled with after? And within the silence of what's being depicted to us, there's no dialogue, but his family is still here as he performs their funeral rites. So technically, everything that was in the first 3 pages I showed y'all is in the last 2 pages. We just have that subtle difference of the amount of balloons and the use of silence. Here's another sequence of images I wanted us to look at. We're not going to read them super closely, but there are a few things I want to point out about these images. Number 1, we get narrative boxes, mostly. Number 2, Nezuko and Tanjiro embroiled in a tussle, and we get these narrative boxes from Tanjiro's perspective. I want to make sure we acknowledge what is being shown to us here so that we can compare it to what I'm going to show y'all next. So I'm going to point out a few things, and then I want y'all to tell me when I go to the next page what you noticed is no longer existent. So we have, like I said, Nezuko and Tanjiro. They're surrounded by these narrative boxes that are on the corner of the panels. We see all of their facial expressions. We see their tussle, their fight against each other. Giyu, a demon slayer, shows up. And we start to see, by the way, this is the first page and this is the second, we start to see his narrative boxes. What do we notice was in the first one that is now missing from the second one? He doesn't say any of these things. He's thinking it though. He's thinking it real hard. Maybe it's a kind of like reflection on himself as well, telling us a little about Giyu's character because it's an internal narrative as well. The fact that he can't or he isn't saying these words to Tanjiro might also signify a kind of distance that we have from Giyu. We definitely get that in the way that his face is being ghosted by a lot of these narrative boxes. There's even this whole panel where Giyu is absent. They don't all appear in the same panel. The panels are not as populated. Who is missing? Who is succinctly missing? Who is being ghosted by narrative boxes? Nezuko. Even the panel break right here participates in ghosting her. He even tries to ghost her here when he stabs her. I'm going to send you to the afterlife. Right? Before, when we had Tanjiro's narrative boxes, all of them were always framed around them. Faces were always in view. Here, right here, right here, here. Even the sound effects are participating in framing their faces. Nezuko is being ignored by Giyu. He's already written her off. You're exactly right, Poco. He's already written her off as a demon who needs to be slain. And the only person that matters, the only other person we see is Tanjiro, because Giyu is actively looking at Tanjiro. In fact, we see more of Tanjiro than we do of Giyu in any of these panels, right? Again, portraying a sense of distance, a detachment from Nezuko. She is not even being considered by him. She is just meant to die because of what she is. And then we get these sets of panels. Nezuko protects Tanjiro, and here we still don't see her face. Here we still don't see her face. Still don't see her face until she protects him. And all of a sudden, Giyu's narrative boxes and the sound effects are framing her. He sees her. Her presence demands to be perceived. Isn't that fun? Isn't that a fun way to tell your story? To show not only through dialogue and character movement and action, but also the way the characters are framed within the panels, that Giyu has had a change in perspective. I think chapter 1 is one of the most beautifully done Demon Slayer chapters in the entire series. That's today's topic, sound effects and balloons. So what did we learn? Okay, recap. TLDR. Sound effects, the way that they're shaped as well as where they come from, can play a role in storytelling. Balloons can also, of course, play a role in character motivation, showing us dialogue, but can also effectively show us something about the narrative and the way that they're placed and the things that they ghost, the things that they hide. But what if both of these things are not there? What if sound effects and balloons are absent from what you're reading? Silence can be very loud, like you said, Sass. When we don't have sound effects, what is that trying to signify to us? When something is silent, without dialogue, that can also tell a story.